Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. We have another full afternoon ahead for you, so let's get to our next speaker, our featured speaker for this afternoon. He will explore both the real and perceived barriers to increased accessibility to the performing arts for people with disabilities and how to overcome them. He holds degrees from the Curtis Institute of Music, Yale University, and Harvard Graduate School of Education. He is currently the co-director of music at the Conservatory Lab Charter School in Boston. He's also conductor of the Dudamel Orchestra, winner of a Juno Award, and a member of the Terry Fox Hall of Fame. He was also awarded a Diamond Jubilee Medal from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for his contributions to the Commonwealth. Please welcome Adrian Anantawan.
Okay. Thank you. Thought I'd start with a piece of music. Thank you for allowing me to share that with you. It's always nice to start with a piece of music. Thank you so much, Mr. Dworkin, for having me here. I'm tremendously honored to be in a room full of people who are interested in the intersection between the arts and accessibility. And I'm hoping that I can provide another narrative and a set of experiences to sort of document that as well through my background with one with a disability and a performing career, and now going very much into education. So as mentioned before, I am working at a school with about 300 kids. They all play musical instruments, and I ended up taking this picture last September. These were like the first few minutes of school that these kindergartners had for the first time in their lives, and some of them look bewildered, some of them look excited, some of them look absolutely bored. But it was interesting to me to see that they were taking a step into a journey that would not only last them the next few decades of their lives, but some of them the rest of their lives. And one of the things that we like to do at our school is not necessarily name an instrument or an object, say, this is a violin, but to ask them, what do you notice? And treat them like scientists gathering as much evidence as possible. So one girl raised her hand, she was 4 years old, and she said, well, I see a stick and hair and a whole lot of wood. And it was a very simple answer, but I was practicing later that evening. And it made me reflect that how from an assemblage of such simple materials are we able to create something as complex as the human condition. I was thinking that in some ways the violin itself is a 16th century piece of technology that was originally served to expand the range of the human voice. But I think by extension and on a much deeper level, it also serves to extend our cognition, our emotions, and our behaviors. It is as much a tribute to the past as it is a commitment to the future. And I'd like to share a little bit about my past. I was born without a right hand. Doctors theorized that an umbilical cord had wrapped around my right hand and kept it from growing when I was in my mother's womb. It was unexpected for my parents at the time, and I think they were more worried about presenting me to my grandparents for the first time, because I was a first-generation American in America, and they were worried that through the traditions of Chinese superstition that my grandparents would perceive it as some curse upon the family or some type of retribution from some type of past sin from previous generations. But when my grandmother saw me for the first time, she acted in a very surprising way. She said, well, there's nothing wrong with him. He just needs to make sure that he gets as much exercise as possible with his small hand. So over the next couple days, she crafted a bracelet with some bells attached to it so that I could wear it in the crib. And then every time that I would move my right hand rather than my left, it would make some type of sound. And as a baby, I'd be, ooh, I like this, I like this. And I think that was probably my first experience with a musical instrument. So I started from birth. Fast forward to grade 5, I was 10 years old in a public school. And as per curriculum, our teacher needed us to play a musical instrument. And she thought that the recorder would be concurrently the most accessible and also the cheapest option at the time. And even though she had accessibility in mind, the irony was that it left me very much out of that picture, and it actually did force my parents to look for different options. But it was like I was disabled, not necessarily in the sense of an identity or a noun, but disabled in terms of a verb, which meant that it was the effect of attitudes, environments, and tools upon my ceiling of potential development. So my parents wouldn't have any of that, so they changed the environment of the tools. We went to a place called the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital in Toronto, Canada, where I used to live. And they were responsible for creating many great varieties of different adaptations, anywhere from riding my bike to being able to swim, or even something as simple as being able to cut food on the table. So I came in to the prosthetics department with a violin case in hand, and my parents said to the prosthetist, well, guess what he wants to do next? And They said, my child wants to play a violin. Deal with it. And after a couple weeks, and of course a bit of parental pressure, this device was created. It's called a spatula. It's essentially a plaster cast connected by some Velcro, like a shoe almost. It has a piece of aluminum that goes around the bow. And they thought that, well, the adaptation's there. All he has to do is move his shoulder back and forth, and he should be making music in no time. Unfortunately, that's not how it happened. Evening came around, and I was already sort of plucking away at the instrument, so I was having a lot of fun. Then I think the first sounds sounded very much like something like that. And little did my parents realize that was probably the type of sounds that they would be getting at least for the next month. It was as much a concern for my parents as it was the prosthetist, though, because they were thinking, well, maybe this adaptation isn't working. Maybe he needs to have some type of wrist device created, or maybe the mechanics of the length of his arm are too long or too short. But we were very patient with it, and we kept up with it, such that in retrospect, we were actually right on the money in terms of the adaptation being essentially perfect straight out of the gate, in a sense that I wasn't working against it when I was actually playing or performing, but having the same types of problems as any developing musician, which was the connection between whatever you see on that manuscript and what you do physically with the instrument. The second thing that I was very lucky with was that I was in an activity that was intrinsically engaging. It was the right medium, which was classical music, and it was also the right instrument, which was the violin, which was something that I was willing to work for and pursue to a higher and higher degree, such that by 2009, I had finished my master's in music, and I had had such wonderful opportunities to play at like the White House, for the Pope, at the Olympics. And these were special experiences not only as a musician, but also one as a human being. So I decided the fall of 2009 to go back to Holland Bloor Review and play a recital to show the appreciation that I had for the work that they had done with me. After the recital, I did a tour of the entire facility and came across the music therapy department. The staff were working with inpatients who had disabilities that were, I think, even more challenging than my own. So ranging from cerebral palsy, spinal muscular atrophy, or Down syndrome. And they were using music as not necessarily an artistic tool, but a tool for psychosocial and physical rehabilitation. And the thought came up to my mind, well, they're never going to turn anyone back because of a disability or how they are born physically. Is there a way that we can leapfrog upon those great ideas, the way that they work with kids, the tools that they use, the methods they use to research their efficacy, and transform those into the realm of performance as well, which was, of course, my world. So I decided to create an interdisciplinary team funded through the Yale School of Music and the Holland Bloor Review Foundation, known as the Virtual Music Instrument Initiative, or VMI initiative for short. And this was aimed at developing tools and technology not only to be used within the therapeutic context, but also the concert stage as well. And rather than explain some of the work that was done, I'll show you a quick video of some of the interactions of this instrument with some kids at Holland Bloor Review.
Thank you for choosing VMI, Virtual Music Instrument. Virtual Music Instrument uses cutting-edge motion detection technology to translate movements into music. The system generates musical sounds from movements interacting with colorful shapes on the screen. When you start the software, it will activate the connected webcam. The webcam captures yourself and your movements related to the shapes you draw on the screen. VMI will interpret the motion and transfer the output to speakers.
Very nice. She comes to make silly music. Yeah, right.
So I like that last boy just because you can really tell. If you need any type of measurement on engagement, you just need to look, at a smile of a child, of course. So during this project, I came across a really interesting person. His name is Eric Wan, and he was one of the developers of the VMI. He was paralyzed in his teens. And I think the most interesting thing for me was that he also played the violin up until his paralysis. So we were presented with a very interesting confluence of circumstances by which not only were we able to move the VMI onto a performance setting, but also do it within the context of a very professional production, meaning that we thought that it would be great if Eric could act as a soloist with a live chamber orchestra, and he would be using the virtual music instrument to participate in a regular concert with able-bodied musicians. And after a long process of developing the technology even more and understanding how the music worked, we decided that we would hold a concert with the Montreal Chamber Orchestra. And this was a result of the dress rehearsal that we had a few days prior. Let's try the first two variations.
Which one would you like to keep, the quarter notes?
Let's keep the quarter notes.
Okay, so that was...
Is that okay, Eric? I think we're covering you right now. We can't hear any of the counterpoints, so
come in too.
why don't we start from there first? When I see someone like Eric producing music and we can react off of that into something completely new in a new territory, well, it makes it fresh again. For me as an artist, it was fascinating to see how technology was married into the aesthetic and music-making experience.
Yep. We're all playing.
The ability to create music with just the wave of a hand, with small gestures or moving your head, it was something very powerful.
I've learned playing with the violin for about 8 years before I got paralyzed. Ever since I got paralyzed, I really didn't think that I was able to play an instrument again. I've never done it in the settings like this before, not mentioning being on the stage. It's an incredible feeling. It's not something that I thought I would be able to do before the VMI was invented. It's pretty good.
Yay! Bravo! Great job, Eric. I think that came together pretty quickly. Yeah. So we eventually held that performance live, and we created a paper, published a paper, outlining our experiences not only for the audience, but the fellow musicians in the orchestra at that time. and especially Eric's perceptions. And one of the things that we realized was while his participation was meaningful emotionally and just a really great experience for him, there was a certain lack of creative agency that he had while making this music, the same types of processes that you and I would have playing an instrument. Not only because of the limits of the repertoire, I mean, who wants to play canon over and over again in their life, and also the limits of the technology as well. So the steps have been very small, but I'd like to address that technological side. We're in an age right now where technology is becoming more omnipresent in our lives. In some ways, it feels omnipresent to me in general. And I think my fear is that computers and just being connected all the time will serve as a way to dehumanize me or just make me into almost like a digital shadow of who I really am. And I would say that the development of technology within the context of special needs and the arts may in fact serve to flip that paradigm, where technology is actually being used to reveal an inner humanity of people who are not able to show that or express that all the time. In which case, we bring technology and the development of great technology to its most ideal, which is to extend the range of human capability. We are all in this room because I think that we are outliers and not exactly mainstream in many ways. And I've observed marginalization on so many levels. For an organization like this, it's the marginalization of class or race within the field of classical music. In my experiences, it's been the marginalization of arts within education and healthcare, and now marginalization of disability within society as a whole. But one of the great things about being at these edges is that we're able to make that leap into the unknown, into things that are new, and create it far easier than people who are trying to jump from that center, and we have a tremendous advantage in that. So the question that we need to be asking ourselves now is not necessarily why we do this, because I think that we all deeply care about accessibility and being able to change the world for the better. The larger issue remains how to do that. And projects like the Virtual Music Instrument Initiative is an example of that how. Being able to jump outside of your comfort zone and to be able to collaborate in an interdisciplinary way that helps not only your craft, but helps the other side as well. So as a musician, being able to understand the processes of music on an empirical level and using metrics that are used in music therapy, for instance, may have headways into being able to advocate for music education in public schools at large. But when we do start answering and grappling these questions, the answers are already there. They're locked in some ways within our study populations, within our students, within the musical notes that we play, as much as they reside in this quantity known as the human spirit. So thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Adrian, before you sneak off, you mentioned something in your talk. You said Eric, your colleague.
Yes.
After the performance, or in the video actually, he says, "I didn't think I would ever be able to play an instrument again." And I wonder whether emerging technologies are going to really force us to reimagine how we think about music and how we think about instruments and how they're played.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that classical music in general has always had this issue of accessibility since its inception. It was created for a certain elite type of person, either social standing or even just like being able to do something physically or not. And I feel like through technology, like we are in many ways in need not necessarily of finding access into the music making experience, but finding quality, meaningful experiences with other people in the same room making music with them. Which means, again, and I was talking again about the limits of the repertoire as well, and I think there's a tremendous angle for new works, for instance, to be commissioned for technological instruments, and it's already been done to a certain extent, but to also include the special needs community within that, I think, helps all of us.
Mm-hmm. As you continue in this work, where do you see the most potential for growth and development?
I think the largest growth isn't necessarily in the research itself. There's so much technology coming out there. I think that there's a real opportunity for application, in a sense that understanding technology within the music sense doesn't have to be limited to just whatever you do in front of a computer screen as a video game, for instance. Are there ways to incorporate this technology very much like we do with an instrument to provide enough resistance along the way so that the student or learner is in some ways forced to explore the world in a more deep and meaningful way. So I'm hoping in the future that we can incorporate a lot of these tools that were being developed, not necessarily within the realm of even music performance, but starting at the base level and getting this technology into the hands of children who have disabilities and are trying to find ways to be included within the music curriculum.
Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian Anantawan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
As we get ready for our next speaker, just a couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, don't forget, if you want to connect with any of the speakers today, you can go right next door to the networking room after each talk and talk to them a little more about each topic. And also, there is still time for you to participate on the SphinxCon conversation page. We asked a question about what 2 things you think an organization needs to really be successful in diversity and equity work, and you still have time to share your thoughts. I think we're ready for our next speaker. He will explore the role funders play in increasing diversity in the arts. He has over 3 decades of leadership positions in higher education, philanthropy, banking, and the arts. He's a trustee of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Henry Street Settlement, Lincoln Center Theater, Graduate Center of CUNY, Pratt Institute, Film Forum, Turrell Fund, and a member of the New York State Council on the Arts. Please welcome John Morning.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is a call to foundations, arts agencies, corporate contributors, and all grant makers in the arts. It's a challenge to colleagues in philanthropy to rethink specific kinds of funding. I'm John Morning. I'm not a musician, but I am a lifelong professional artist, a designer, printmaker, and BFA graduate of art school, all in New York City. Throughout my career, 2 concerns have been uppermost. One, an interest in all of the arts, music, theater, dance, literature, as being critical to my own art. And 2, an interest in public service as meaningful to individual growth. I've served as a board member of 4 foundations and a dozen other nonprofit higher education or arts entities. I regret perhaps that some of them were named because the views that I want to express today are solely my own and not to be associated with any organization with which I'm affiliated. But for those reasons, it's a privilege to address SphinxCon today because this organization has been so devoted to art, especially music, and its place in society. And I believe, as difficult as it is to follow Aaron Dworkin, that some of the concerns I want to express here are a necessary and helpful prelude to some of the solutions that he suggested. Unfortunately, in our concert halls, the interests of art and society seem quite divergent. The New York Philharmonic routinely performs with only one or two black players, and very often none. And no black musician is a member of that organization, as Aaron pointed out at Carnegie Hall last October. However, the New York Phil is no exception. The four ensembles that round out the elite five of American music draw the same color line. It would be very difficult to find a black face among their ranks that are shown here. The segregated world of today's symphony orchestras is like one that was foretold almost 50 years ago by the Kerner Commission, appointed by President Lyndon Johnson. As you see, it had just two black members, Roy Wilkins, who was head of the NAACP, and he's seated at the far left, and Senator Edward Brooke, a Republican of Massachusetts, somewhat ironically, who is standing second from the right next to Cyrus Vance. Directly in front of Senator Brooke is John Lindsay, who was at that time mayor of New York City and a nationally regarded figure. This is 1968, so there was only one obligatory female member of the commission, and that's Catherine Graham Pedden, the Commissioner of Commerce for the state of Kentucky. And beyond that, I have no idea why she was brought to this group, but I think that would certainly not be tolerable today. But I don't say that there's been no racial progress. It just hasn't happened in classical music. We're a long way from Stephen Fetchit, who was the face of Black America before World War II, to Barack Obama, President of the US today. And surprisingly, only 60 years separate their births. In the euphoria that followed President Obama's election, the popular term post-racial heralded a new era of racial opportunity. But post-racial is by no means non-racial, where there is no consideration of race or ethnicity as a barrier. We're not there yet, as present realities show us. One of those realities is that our orchestras remain essentially segregated companies, among the last in all the arts, even as theater, dance, poetry, and other forms have made some, if not ideal, progress in racial diversity. This visual shows in graphic terms the woeful minority of musicians that are black. This situation in classical music is one that I would call apartheid. The exclusion of black symphonic players is near total, even in New York City, where we have 2 million African American inhabitants. Around the world, the New York Philharmonic represents a city which it in no way resembles. Now, what orchestra officials contend, of course, is that they have, quote, only the best musicians. Parenthetically, that means white performers. This is part of a syllogism of deceit. As you see, it leads to the idea we do not have black musicians, therefore blacks are not the best musicians. This is something that demeans black artists and black people alike. Every all-white performance, subtly or not, suggests black inability to make the grade. The potential to reach audiences of color who would like to see like artists is dismissed out of hand. And so's the chance to enjoy significant talents that are unjustly neglected because of race, or racism, I beg your pardon. This visual, of course, shows 4 Americans who have happened to perform very admirably in music, beginning with Leontine Price on the left, then Scott Joplin, Marian Anderson, and of course the inimitable Duke Ellington. But the insult and injury don't end there. Symphony orchestras depend significantly on charitable contributions, whether that's through foundations, individuals, or corporations. This giving is possible because of tax deductions. That money would otherwise be in the public treasury, part of money from all taxpayers. There's no more basic wrong to our fundamental democracy than to have money from all of the people used to deprive some of the people. Here in Paul Revere's enduring image of the Boston Massacre, you see portrayed an early objection to the use of taxes. But I do want to state to this audience that the first to fall in that massacre was Crispus Attucks, a black patriot. Now, if South Africa provides a term of reference in apartheid, it also gives a response to the moral crisis in classical music by recalling the time when principled nonprofits, corporations, and churches united to withhold investment in that country's racist pre-Mandela regime. Today's philanthropic community cannot turn a blind eye to continued bias here. The exclusion of black musicians is no less abhorrent than the exclusion of women or gays. I believe it is only right for funders to deny support of organizations and activities that are knowingly unfair, undemocratic, and unproductive. Philanthropy has enormous wealth and power that can make a difference, and it should be used to fund enlightened institutions, but not to fund those that are indifferent to or ignorant of society and the changes taking place in it. And I think Warren Buffett's precept here gives a very clear idea of what might be achieved by some judicious funding in behalf of rights. Mr. Buffett may be regarded as a secular saint in our current day America, but to turn to the leader, a real leader in religion, I just want to use this image to underscore that we do know the price of not speaking out for what is right. We don't serve the arts well by ignoring bias and separation, but by enhancing the arts' ability to create and reflect a more equal, diverse, and just society. This is what the arts are uniquely suited to do, and this is what we must be prepared to continue to help them in doing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before you go, I had a question for you. As you know, we are emerging from a recession, and many foundations faced a period of very lean years. Portfolios were shrinking. How do you maintain arts funding as a priority in those organizations during those lean years when other things may seem to be a higher priority?
There's no question that arts funding has suffered during the recession. But I think one implication of the question you ask is that if things have gotten better, if there's a greater financial opportunity today, then maybe there ought to be greater moral imperatives, and I don't see that that's necessarily following. If times are better, then we ought to be performing better, and that may be happening in some areas, but I don't believe that that's the case in classical music, unfortunately.
Why do you think there isn't that support?
I think it goes back to what Aaron spoke of so eloquently just before lunch, long-standing traditions that are hard to overcome, and what may not often be considered as simple selfishness. you know, this is a group of musicians that have a very, very entitled, protected existence, and I can understand the concern to maintain all of the privileges that go along with it. But that flies in the face of, I think, other concerns that society at large has, rather than the profession itself.
Right now in Detroit, as I'm sure you know, the city is going through a bankruptcy, and a group of foundations and private funders came together to support the Detroit Institute of Arts. Whether or not that plan is going to play out is yet to be known. But do you think there is a shifting role for foundations and private funders to play in the arts?
I do, as I've just said. I think that there's a greater role for funders to play in having some say as to what outcomes are in arts organizations. Clearly, in the case of the Detroit Institute, that's been made quite apparent. But just as there is that power to help organizations in a positive sense, I think that there should be a little more concern to look at organizations more critically in terms of funding. As I said, I think we can't continue to turn a blind eye to some of the practices that exist in classical music. And I perhaps am emphasizing it because of the SphinxCon audience, but there are other arts in which I think there are retrograde organizations. And I think one of the things to draw attention to the concern of all of us about this is to ask for some greater examination of what's going on when they come to the funding table.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Morning, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We had a slight change to the schedule this afternoon. Amy Fitterer was not able to join us, so we'll move to our next speaker. If tackling diversity issue feels overwhelming, maybe even insurmountable, our next speaker believes the issue can be made more manageable through the use of measurable data-based tools. He's the Vice President of Local Arts Advancement for Americans for the Arts. He was the project director and book editor for Counting New Beans: Intrinsic Impact and the Value of Art. Please welcome a SphinxCon founding partner, Clayton Lord.
Hello, everyone. I asked them to turn on the lights because I like to see people when I'm talking. When I was 21, I sat down at my kitchen table across from my mother, who was eating a sandwich, and I confronted change. And for me, what change looked like in that moment is that I had just come back from 3 days with the person she thought was my best friend, but who was actually my boyfriend. And I was going to come out. And in that moment, when I was confronting that change, everything basically was stacked up against me saying those words. I thought that I had a good potential of losing my family. I thought I had a good potential of being ostracized by my community. I thought that I would lose the opportunity to ever have a family of my own, to ever have children. And the thing that made me do it anyway is that pragmatically, if I didn't do it, I was going to lose my boyfriend. And I couldn't handle that. I couldn't handle what would happen then, because in a way, I would be over if that was over. And so what I want to talk about today is change, because that's what diversification is. And I think it's important to recognize that. And I'd encourage you all to think about a moment in your personal lives when you have confronted change and you confronted all of the possible negative consequences of that change and what has allowed you to move forward and make that change anyway. So I have 4 challenges today. I don't know that I have any solutions, but I have 4 challenges for you, because I think this room is potentially the most invested group of people in this conversation, and I challenge you to move further, because I think together we can actually make this progress that we want to make. So the first one is to exercise empathy. And here I'm not talking about encouraging white people to empathize with people who have less privilege than they do, although I think that that's incredibly important and something we need to be figuring out how to do more. I'm actually talking about you all in this room taking a moment to understand what it takes for a person who has done something one way for decades, or an organization who has existed for 100 years in a specific way to make the change that we're asking them to make. And that comes down to what underlies the fear of change. And in order to understand that, particularly in this context, we have to understand who we're trying to get to change. Who is this person? At Americans for the Arts, I work primarily with local arts agencies. We think there are about 5,000 of them across the country. And we did a salary survey last year in order to understand how much people were making. And one of the strange side things that we were able to glean from that salary survey is what they looked like. They're 86% white. Staff members at local arts agencies, at least those who responded to the survey, are 86% white. If you look at just the executive directors, they're 92% white. That, of course, is an unacceptable number, and it's something that needs to change. But it's also something that we need to recognize as a reality in this conversation. When you look at other demographics from that research, they're highly educated. 50% of them have a graduate degree, and they make a really good salary. So if you're trying to get these people to make change, then you have to confront where they're coming from. They're extremely educated. They are able to understand the full breadth and scope of the problem. They make a good salary, and they have a lot of white privilege inside them that they may or may not recognize. That's why I encourage you to entertain pragmatism. This is a difficult conversation, but when it comes down to it, what's the actual impact of the change you're trying to encourage? And I mean that in a very pragmatic way. I was once on a panel talking about these diversity issues, and I had written a blog post. I write this blog called New Beans, and I'd written this blog post about the difference between valuing and managing diversity. And there are a lot of people in the arts who value the idea of diversity. There are a lot of very enlightened liberals who believe that diversity is good, that equity is good. But as Aaron was talking about earlier today, if you ask people whether they're doing anything about it, that number shrinks dramatically. And those are the people who are actually managing diversity. They're managing change. And I gave this kind of allegory about this psychological technique for helping depressed people to start feeling happier. And basically what it comes down to is that depressed people are not super inclined to smile. They don't want to smile, they don't feel happy. And the therapy is basically smile anyway. And you exercise the muscles in your face, and you exercise the muscles in your face, and you exercise the muscles in your face. And over time, that smile starts to encourage chemical reactions in your brain that reactivate your happiness, and you become happy emotionally. Which is to say that the pragmatic action of smiling without the motivation eventually leads to the belief in happiness. I'm arguing that we need to stop, well, not stop. I'm arguing that we, in addition to trying to encourage moral shifts among the people that we're talking to, we also need to be talking to them from a pragmatic point of view. And one of the main reasons for that is that I really don't want this to take 60 more years. And I think that one of the things we have to confront is that if we're asking people to change their moral compass, then that's decades of work. And it's something that may take decades of work anyway. It surely has taken decades of work to get where we are now. But I have to believe that for certain of those people, if you present them with a business case that is data-based, they may not actually come with you on the moral path, but they might do it anyway if they think it's going to make their organization more relevant and more likely to survive in the future. Which gets to the third challenge, which is to provide data. One of the things that's fascinating about this question of diversity is that unlike most other things in the arts, we have a huge amount of data that we can use in order to make that case happen. So what is the specific change you're looking for? What is the specific change that needs to happen? What it comes down to, if you've got someone who is inclined to pursue diversity, but who hasn't really done it before, this is what they imagine is going to happen, is that they're going to pursue diversity, and yeah, it might be a little difficult, but eventually they're going to come out on the other end, it's going to be awesome, right? But instead, what happens is this. As they begin to try and pursue diversity, they discover that their staff isn't diverse enough, their art form isn't working for the group of people they're trying to get to, the time, the place, the board, everything needs to change. And that suddenly becomes an incredibly overwhelming problem. When you add on top of that we're talking about a problem that has been hundreds of years in the making, It can cause people to simply stop. And we don't want that. When I was at Theater Bay Area, where I worked previous to Americans for the Arts, we were commissioned by the California Cultural Data Project and the California Arts Council to create something called the Arts Diversity Index. And what we did was we took Cultural Data Project information, US Census data, the Bay Area Arts and Culture Census, which is a collaborative database of audience attendance information, and the California Secretary of State voting records. And we cross-referenced them in order to understand the difference demographically between the people who were going to theater and the people who existed in the community overall. We had a giant sample size of 570,000 arts patrons versus about 5.4 million people in the service area that we were looking at. And we saw 7 different types of diversity. So first, 58.9 years age versus 47. There's about a 10-year difference between the arts goers and the people who exist in the community overall. Similarly, there's about a $40,000 difference in household income between people who go to theater and people who exist in the community overall in the Bay Area. And most substantially, there's a 48% difference in the number of white people who go to theater versus exist in the Bay Area overall. These are incredibly frustrating numbers, but they are also much more specific than any numbers that people had been working with before. And one of the things that we were able to do, because we had this substantial data set, is we were able to actually cross-reference it using a statistical formula that was drawn from biological sciences to create an arts diversity index. And what that means, when you've got everything on a scale of 0 to 1, 0 being absolutely homogeneous and 1 being absolutely diverse, is that you can actually figure out positive correlations between different types of diversity. To simplify this, let's just look at these. We were able to tell, looking at this data, that there is a statistically significant correlation between the age diversity of an audience and the race diversity of an audience, between the income diversity of an audience and the race diversity of an audience. Now, this is maybe not surprising to you. It's a lot of the conclusions that we found were logical, but they were also specific, and they required specific action. And what it means is that if you have a board of directors who is really disinclined to have a conversation about race, then maybe you can have a conversation about age. Maybe you can have a conversation about income. Maybe you can get to a place where they are comfortable having the conversation, or where you are more comfortable having the conversation, or where you feel it's more manageable for your organization to pursue change without destabilizing. The last thing that we were able to do, if you create a scale that runs from 0 to 1, and you have where you are and where your community is you can actually lay out on a piece of paper how close or far apart an organization is from true parity with the community in which they exist. That's revolutionary. The last thing that I want to encourage us to do with all of this information, if they are provided that information, is to celebrate incremental progress, to not simply complain that people aren't moving fast enough. Because the truth of the matter is, this is a long-term problem that is going to involve long-term solutions. California Shakespeare Theater is in Northern California, and they got into some hot water because a reviewer came to one of their shows, and they'd been doing a lot of diversity work. And that reviewer came to their show, and they said, you know, this audience looks really white. And they wrote a whole article about it. And so I called them up because I knew how much work they'd been doing, and I said, do you have any information on how your diversity work is actually going? And they said, well, yeah, but we don't really like sharing it because we don't think it's very significant at all, and we're kind of frustrated about it. And I said, well, what is it? And they said, we had a 2% increase in our African American audience. I said, over what period of time? And they said, 1 year. And I said, you went from 3% to 5% of your total audience being African American in 1 year. That's not something you should hide. That's something you should celebrate. That's amazing. That's more than most organizations are doing right now, especially if you're able to sustain it, to grow it. You should be talking about this because this is the type of success that inspires other people to pursue this very difficult and potentially destabilizing path that you're pursuing. And we as a community need to celebrate that progress, not tear it down because it's not moving at our pace. If you're going from here to here, you're still going in the right direction. So, empathy, pragmatism, data, progress. I am 13 years into being an out gay man. I married the man who I came out for. I have a 3-year-old kid. I love my life. I have with him and with my child, confronted challenges in my life that I never thought I would be able to handle on my own and probably couldn't. And honestly, if I had been pursuing the moral change that I needed to pursue in order to feel comfortable coming out, I don't know how long it would have taken me, but I imagine that I would be in a very different place than I am today. So I would just encourage all of us to understand that we're all looking for progress, and we do need progress, and we do need change. But we need to do it at a pace and with the tools that are going to make the people we're trying to get to change feel at least somewhat comfortable with where they're going and how they're going to get there. Thank you.
So if you're going to start using data, let's say it's just not a core part of how your organization does work, how do you get over that fear of the numbers and look at the data as your friend?
Well, and I think it's hard because it's not necessarily a skill set that a lot of arts organizations inherently have on their staffs. I think one of the things that's been really valuable in the field over the last, I would say, 5 years is that there are larger scale initiatives that are coming, Sustain Arts, the Cultural Data Project, some of the data centers that exist. Southern Methodist University just created one, Target Resource Group has another one, that allow the aggregation of that information without necessarily having the personal expertise. And then I think that the trick is figuring out exactly what you're saying, which is how to take that data and do something meaningful with it. What we tried to do with the Arts Diversity Index was to make it as simple as possible. Now, I left Theater Bay Area before we were able to actualize what we wanted to do, which was to create an online system where people would have been able to put in some simple demographics about their audience and tell us what their community was, and it would spit out the 0 to 1 scores. But I think if we were able to get to that point where it wasn't actually that you had to do the heavy lifting of data processing, which is not something that most people in the arts are inclined to do, but you were instead able to see in a concrete way that I've got this far of a distance to go, and if you were then also given a set of tools that said, all right, so you've decided in your community that you, or in your organization, that you want to tackle the disparity in age diversity in your audience versus the community. Here's a one sheet of what other organizations like you have done in order to try and tackle that problem. Then suddenly you get to a point where the change feels manageable and incremental, and where you feel as someone who is new in this and who is very, very worried about your ability to do it in a nuanced and productive way, that you're supported.
If you're tracking your progress, if you're using data and really using it as a tool, there's always the possibility that you won't move in the direction you want to. How do you use those, and I use the term failure very loosely, but those failures to help you redefine the direction you're moving in and not just get discouraged and put the numbers away?
Yeah. You know, I was having a conversation a couple days ago about how bad we are in the arts field at what the tech industry calls research and development, or iterative design. And I think it has to do with the fact that we don't have the same resources, but more than that, I think it has to do with a mentality that, that we often think that the idea that we're pursuing is the idea. And if that idea doesn't work, then we have to shift 50 degrees in order to do something else. I think the other answer is that sometimes this doesn't just sit with the one organization. It sits with a collaborative, whether that's a service organization, a local arts agency, a compassionate funder who is interested in trying to make this change happen. In Canada, there's a foundation called the McConnell Foundation that has actually instituted an incremental evaluation process for their grantees, where they actually provide the evaluator. And they do it in a way that allows the grantees to pursue the entire breadth of the grant that they got, but to do it in a way where they periodically are checking in with someone who actually understands how to look at data and information and keeps them on the path towards the best success that they can have. Now, I also think it's important for us to embrace failure as an option. I think that if we all succeeded all the time, I don't quite know that we'd be having this conversation. And that it's actually incredibly useful. I think we're reticent in the arts to talk about the failures we've had, in part because we fear repercussions, in part because we fear we might lose money. And that when it comes down to it, if you don't talk about the failure of a technique to try and solve a problem around diversity in your community, then someone else is going to try it and waste a bunch of time and money that they could probably have put towards trying to find that next success that maybe you would then borrow back.
Ladies and gentlemen, Clayton Lord.
Thank you.
So we are now entering into our next networking break. For about the next 30 minutes, there's coffee, some healthy snacks next door, and Afa Dworkin just posted a question on the Google community page. What are you doing to ensure diversity is a priority in your arts organization or community? And you can again go to SphinxCon.org, and to the left of the page, you'll see the conversation page, and you can share your thoughts there. So let's step away for about 30 minutes, and we're actually ahead of time, so it looks like you're going to get out a little early this evening. You'll have a little extra time to explore Detroit. So we'll see you back here in half an hour.